7 a.m., and this is the kind of fire we've got burning. There's the airfield. Damn. Those first 2 barrels, they went off right away. You get it?
The bombers have been attacked. Hundreds of Flamingo missiles and drones struck. The airfield in Engels was blown up. Strategic aircraft and missile depots were destroyed. Yeah. Thousands injured. The fires can't be put out. We're going to show exclusive footage and details right now. Hundreds of new Flamingo missiles have been launched at Russia. It's fine, he crapped himself. Bases and oil depots are burning, and this is just the beginning.
It's burning here in the center.
The walls are shaking for Muscovites. There it is, the column of smoke. That's why all the walls in our house started shaking. Turn off the lights? You can't turn the lights on. They say the missiles are attracted to heat. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan right now. Friends, boom bada boom. Russians had their walls shaking. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was hit. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, KABs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Ka-555 and Ka-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter were hit, and 13 Russian radar stations were destroyed. And in Russia, they claim that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one IL, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning, an IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of A-101 missiles. And in Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What can you say about this?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is to what extent? Why? Because it was a large-scale attack, both with drones and most likely with a missile. And that Big Bang, since it was a Big Bang, then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie. It was most likely one of our missiles, not ruling out even the possibility of using a long-range Neptune in that direction. And naturally, the detonation that occurred after the strike, as well as the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition that are loaded into aircraft, among other things. Naturally, the planes parked nearby were also damaged. There was no way they could have avoided being damaged. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think that within a few days, our intelligence and our general staff will confirm it after gathering information from satellites and images, decoding them, in other words, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll have another reason to celebrate. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm it clearly with you.
Roman Igorovich, what could have been hit? The bombers themselves, the warehouse with cruise missiles, and the aviation fuel depot. These elements were the targets for Ukraine's armed forces, our missiles and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you an idea, very much like a large bustling city where, in addition to the airfield itself, a huge number of different facilities, buildings, and support structures are involved to support and maintain it, ensuring that everything operates smoothly and efficiently at all times. A large number of infrastructure facilities of various types, ranging from underground fuel storage tanks holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene to various warehouses and SISD, especially important special engineering service for missile preparation. Naturally, there are also depots for aviation bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, they are still far away and hardly anyone talks about this. But south of Engels, several dozen kilometers along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility, the so-called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads intended for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles of the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stored there, specifically tactical nuclear weapons. So just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels, it would be a truly massive one. and people in Kazakhstan would have seen it already. It's just a shame I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I feel sorry for them to disappoint them like that. But nevertheless, this is such a serious facility that you couldn't just take it out with missiles or drones to level it completely. You'd need several squadrons of bombers carpet bombing the area. But if you blow up this underground fuel storage, I'll repeat, we're talking about tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railroad tank cars of this kerosene. They fill more than 150 tons of aviation kerosene there, and for the Tu-95, it's 1 railroad tank car, which is also quite a lot. So there is a reason to strike there. The damage that could be inflicted on this entire facility would be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, back in the day, we handed over our own 2 aircraft to them, those very Tu-160S, Tu-95S, and Tu-22S, along with our KH-55S. Hundreds of missiles were given away. Kuchma was the one handling this at the time, at least. And now, basically, we're going to try to destroy the very same bombers we once handed over to the Russians ourselves. As for what exactly was hit, that will definitely become clear within a few days after the satellite images are decoded.
Roman Yegorovich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved varies as well. There should be at least a regiment there, which is about 1,500 people. There should be about 1,500 to 2,000 Russian military personnel involved in this process.
Could we have eliminated enemy manpower with these strikes, Roman Igor?
Absolutely, 100%. The thing is, even SIS, which is the Engineering and Technical Service, a specialized engineering service, is naturally responsible for the security and defense of the storage facility itself, where the missiles are kept in racks, in special containers, even matches are stored there. There are certain, not just some, but specific mechanisms for climate control, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen were definitely destroyed, and the remaining hundreds were certainly emptied out by this strike. Believe me, the shockwave was felt all the way in Syria.
Roman Igorovich, indeed, right now the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a whole day after the drone attack, and everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, right? The modified missile. Let's discuss this missile as well as the strikes on oil refineries, bases, and on Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Malyuk and Budanov sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes, including the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved at the very least. And probably also the Navy, if Neptune was used there, since it's a coastal missile system, a launch platform, at the very least they're being used. But I thought within a day it would become clear. The long-range Neptune, it's the same story, meaning it's launched from a coastal missile system, obviously not from a UAV. The main targets for this kind of cruise missile are objects that need to be penetrated. After all, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or even 50 or however much they carry. And the warhead, that is a 150-kilogram warhead, can reach the target and detonate it, just as we see now, presumably, let's put it that way for now. They supposedly blew up a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs in Engels. Well, naturally, the same type of warhead could be used against TUEPs as well, or to breach their detonation system, or at the pumping stations. This is one of our main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these representatives, not from our government, are running around with the idea of how to secure the Russian hydrocarbon industry. So God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If Malok and Budanov sanctions hadn't been stopped in May last year, there wouldn't be any this year, because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything down last year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes again. The missile is very good. It's our basic missile, Neptune and Meilong, or Neptune, but it's basically still the X-35 missile. At one time, it was also produced at our facility with our engines for this missile, turbofan engines, dual circuit missiles. It was an air-to-ship missile. That's its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded in order to be able to strike ground targets, and with a reliable engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now cover a distance of more than 500 kilometers. So at the very least, it reached Toksi, which is 500 kilometers away. I think it could have also hit Engels because they basically broke into a warehouse that was sealed. These missiles aren't just lying around outside. So since it was sealed and then broken into, it most likely means a missile got in, but there's no confirmation yet, so we won't confirm it either for now. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Egorovich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we record this now.
Well, the missile's range, at least the confirmed one, is definitely 500 to 600 kilometers. We've seen this with TUAPs and maybe now with Engels. Engels is a little over 600 kilometers away. That's the actual stated range. And what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? It's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to TUAPs. So just draw that circle. That's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. And the stated range, 1,000 kilometers, well, you could put the compass at St. Petersburg, for example, and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels, past Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, this is possible. The engine is very good. Our engine, which we produce, it will definitely run for an hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. So running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. So however many extra buckets you fill the missile with, that's how far it will fly.
That is, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure targets can be attacked.
Well, definitely they are already under serious targeting. And in order for us to fully carry out our tasks of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to reach the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for cruise missiles, it's hardly worth it, for example, to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, they're a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. For this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, that is ballistic missiles. I think if we don't solve this issue this year, then we'll do it next year.
More good news. The main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter came under attack. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125, not UBSV, not BSV, and BRLS MICE. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time and is now being documented.
Well, it definitely took several months. This is the work of Gursbeksmagor. The main intelligence directorate and the security service, their own Beks, most of them unmanned boats, have turned them into aircraft carriers. Both of them. Both Magur from the Gur and Sibeb from the SBU. They can now operate almost like aircraft carriers, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they can also carry unmanned surface and underwater vehicles, essentially serving as both a mothership and a relay station at the same time. Here's a boat that's several meters long with a certain width, and it is specifically designed so that it can take unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as UAVs or drones, on board, for example, and then approach the coast of Crimea or somewhere else on Russian territory, perhaps even closer to the port city of Novorossiysk. From a position several kilometers off the coast, it is capable of launching these drones under direct real-time control using exactly the systems and technologies required for such operations. The boat as a relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just like they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. So a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target depending on its capabilities. Plus, especially the Gurs Magura drones can also carry missiles at sea and in the air, depending on the launch platform. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile. It's an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have those thousands. It has a heat-seeking homing head. If you lock it on, the missile will track and catch up with the target. And if there are two missiles, Maguras equipped with two missiles, then they can also destroy aerial targets. Here is proof of a helicopter being destroyed, and in fact, not just one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR operators have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has ventured into a field that isn't typical for them, and they've performed quite well there. And the security service under Malyuk, that is the GUR under Budanov's command and the SBU under Malyuk's, together they cover practically the entire spectrum. Now they're using strike capabilities, and what's more, they're producing them at their own facilities, which is very important. These are special services operating from their own bases at their own expense. They still have relatively small budgets. These aren't the armed forces of Ukraine, and it's not about billions or hundreds of billions like with Umarov. Yet they've managed to find sponsors on their own, most likely, and perhaps even carried out such tasks independently. Well, good for them, there's nothing more to add.
Tamar Nigovich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian military correspondents, I'd like you to give us a brief overview of the Ukrainian Hrom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Hrom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander. In terms of range, warhead, and control system, we have an Iskander of our own. A good project was launched several decades ago called Sapsan. Based on this Sapsan, a solid fuel ballistic missile system was developed for the Hrom series. And naturally, this project produced results. That is, work was carried out on this project. Now we have Hrom 1 and Hrom 2. We made it with a range of 300 kilometers and sold it with an audit. By the way, it was sold together with the technical documentation using Saudi money, among other things. But most likely, the intervention of our partners allowed us to get back at least the technical documentation, maybe some launchers and possibly even some missiles as well. So you could say that this Hrom 2 is basically the same as the Iskander with a range of 500 kilometers. Moscow, the Ossi, those 500 kilometers. That is, if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rublyovka, remember, we once talked about this. Rublyovka's exporters would be better off staying far away from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because the first Rome should definitely bury Lenin. Because how much longer does he have to lie there after all? The Kremlin is first, and second is Rublyovka. Or the other way around, depending on the circumstance. Out of respect, maybe Rublyovka will be the first to go.
Roman, now, of course, this information that has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents, because in Russia they're claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What do we know about this? Let's analyze it.
To understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border. If you draw a straight line without the curves between Belarus and Oskol, that is between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, this includes the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, these are the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So for us, the main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. The architecture of the front needs to be changed. To open the northern front. It has already been opened after we started advancing toward the Kursk direction. Heading toward Moscow is something only complete idiots talk about. As part of the main task of tying down enemy forces, several tens of thousands of Russian troops were pinned down there. And of course, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, people call it differently. It could also be called a support zone if it's a front line and a mine strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So that's what a buffer zone is like. It's being created, in fact, not even 30 kilometers deep. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but onto Russian territory to lay mines. Not our territory, but Russian territory. If you lay a few 100,000 of these mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even want to. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers, extending the creation of such a buffer zone up to 30 kilometers. We did this in the Kursk direction. We accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was almost catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and take up defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep, without an operational breakthrough, a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory with the occupation of the best defensive lines. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation there. It's the so-called central Russian upland with height differences of 50 to 70 meters. And between, well, just for understanding, between the hills, yes, that is the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, the little creeks, are at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So it's best to occupy these elevation changes at the higher points. It doesn't matter where they are, on our side or the Russian side. If there is an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a task is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, the creation of such a buffer zone. And the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves, which will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw along the borderline and will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up on the Pokrovsk direction where they might have about 2 divisions. That's practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front. They will be passing right by, or rather through the Belgorod region. And in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod region. A positive trend is expected in the near future, at least at the moment. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters even if we knew them. Well, you can't broadcast tactical information on air, but really, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians have claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already refuted this fake news. And according to Andriy Demchenko, the Russians are storming the border of the Sumy region on quad bikes. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
They got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video sequence showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian psychological operations responded differently. From a logical and operational standpoint, they actually responded correctly. Our own information and psychological operations teams should take note of this as well. We should follow their example too. After all, the FSB and KGB guys, they've been doing these psychological special operations for 100 years. And this kind of psychological operation had to be carried out because the appearance of the F-16 almost at the line of contact really rattled the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely to drop certain munitions below the radar horizon of Russian air defenses. Naturally, no one could reach it, and that really put pressure on the Russians in that area. Of course, they needed to counter this information, so they came up with another information psychological operation, claiming they had shot down an F-16 in that direction. And believe me, no one shot anything down. I have friends, a good number of friends, who would have shared any information if something had happened. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are operating along the entire line of contact, both on F-16S and Mirages, who have already gone out on combat missions bravely and skillfully, carrying out a variety of important tasks in those directions and areas where it's possible to operate based on the current density and configuration of the enemy's air defenses, as well as our own ability to effectively cover and protect these aircraft from threats. God's due. Go ahead and fill in the blanks yourselves first, so I don't have to swear too much. This so-called God's race in Trump's eyes, which Putin has organized, for what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. The Ukrainian side, it's the same IPSO, an information psychological special operation in which the top officials of the state are involved. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? In order to give the Russian population primarily, and of course Trump, and regarding Ukraine, a chance to try to suppress, to paint some alternative picture of the real events happening on Kursk soil. We are holding the Kursk land. No one is encircled there. We are holding our ground. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat, indeed, a belated flight. If, as we said, a month and a half ago, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled move to defensive lines. It was a flight, but still to defensive positions located on Russian territory. That's the difference we've been talking about. The Sudzha River in Kursk, well, along the Kershina, which flows there, the Pereplyuika stream, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. There are heights just to the south. Somewhere the elevation is already 220 meters. So here there's at least a 50 to 70 meter rise, and this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudza direction have taken up positions, and at the moment, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything is lost, and so on and so forth. they're trying to cut us off, but they're still very far from encircling us. It's simply unrealistic because along the borderline, there are these ridges. That's where we're positioned. And of course, our troops are present there. In the Kursk region, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. It's a good defensive line. And the Russians who are trying to cut off our direction have gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers. From the borderline, nothing more. They're trying to somehow break through to cut off the supply to this group. But in the information space, to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin threw out some sweet nothings, so to speak, tossed them to Trump, and now Trump is just mirroring them. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their voice heard there, it won't end well for anyone. That's for sure. Most likely, strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into them. And now they have nowhere to turn. Well, Witkov got involved, and after all, he's such a great Israeli-American or American-Israeli for us. That's why Russian oil processing facilities of all kinds and levels will keep burning. Maybe not with the same intensity, and it might be presented a bit differently. Not sanctions or the actions of Ukraine's defense forces, but the work of the local underground at various levels. I think that this kind of work by our informants, by the way, could be just as effective as the current efforts of Ukraine's defense forces. And believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. And the several million residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, you simply won't be able to turn them around.
Dear audience, please like this video. Leave a few kind words in the comments to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Write what you think about this situation overall. Renowned analyst Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.